Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar on helping crews act on contamination. My name is Harriet Rockcliffe-Nally and I've got Julia Bragg and Debbie Slater in the room with me today. So firstly, a little bit about WRAP. Most of you know who we are, but our vision is a world in which resources are used sustainably. So we're reinventing, rethinking and redefining what is possible. A quick bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be available on our website afterwards. You can ask questions at any time during the webinar via the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer them all at the end of the webinar. So what we're covering today, this webinar is designed to help you run a training session for crews with the aim of reducing overall contamination in recycling. So we're going to have a look at why this is important. We're going to have a look at some tips on how you could deliver a good training session. We're going to be touching on the training slides that we've developed and the resource pack, which should help you deliver a session. And then we're going to talk about how you can run some engaging activities with crews in your session, and then just follow up with what resources we have available to help you do all of this.
Thank you very much, Harriet. Hi everybody, my name is Debbie Slater. I'm a recycling and collections advisor in the local authority team here at WRAP. Just before we kick off today, we'd like to do a quick vote. You should have some voting buttons at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen, it should give you some options there. And we'd just like to know whether you did attend or have watched our webinar on contamination that we ran back in the summer. Just give you a couple of seconds to answer that there. It doesn't matter if you didn't, we're just trying to get an idea of who's attended previously and if people have got a good handle on some of the topics that we might cover today. I'm just waiting for the votes to come in now. Okay, so there's a few of you that did, that's great. Quite a few of you that haven't. Like I said, that's not a problem. You can go onto our website and download the presentation and watch it from there. But it's just to let you know that we will be talking about feedback mechanisms today. So thinking about how you can tackle contamination by feeding back to residents when they're not doing things correctly and making some changes in behaviour through those methods. So we'll cover those things today, but it might just be worth going back and having a look at the original presentation to give you a bit more information about that. Okay. We're just having a couple of technical issues. We're trying to move on to the presentation now. Okay, I've just cover why we're going to cover look at contamination today and what the main sources of problems are and why it's important that we tackle it. Contamination is a big problem for many local authorities. We know that. There's obviously more restrictions in markets, and it's important that we improve the quality of our materials. Our tracker results show that there are still a lot of people not getting recycling quite right, and a few people that are getting it really wrong. So we know that it's still important that we deliver feedback to residents to make them change their behaviours. And that's a key thing that we covered in the previous webinar. But today is about using your crews to deliver that feedback, because they're the best placed people to deliver that feedback directly to residents. And today is about how we can deliver that training, what information that they need to be engaged in the process, and just to think about the different ways that you might want to increase their understanding and ensure that they're acting appropriately and to help you improve the quality of the material that you collect. I'm going to hand over back to Harriet now, and she's going to go through some tips on how you might want to deliver this training.
Thanks, Debbie. So we're just going to have a quick look at the following three things. So what makes a good presenter whilst you're delivering training? How can you best prepare for delivering training? And what are some of the potential challenges that you might come across? So looking at what makes a good presenter then. So firstly, tone of voice. It's good to be reassuring and to be calm whilst you're presenting. Go quite slowly and try and keep it simple and clear. You don't want to overcomplicate things. Good presenters, they engage their audience with what they're saying. So it's always worthwhile checking along the way that people are understanding the content, that you're asking them questions, and that you're taking them on that journey with you. Knowledge, you need to know what you're talking about. So it's always helpful to have a run through of your session before you deliver it. Do a couple of practice rounds so that you feel really confident with what you're actually presenting. Body language and eye contact whilst you're in the room. Try and be flexible and adapt to how the audience is actually responding to what you're saying. Clarity and structure of talk, so have a think about how your talk flows. Hopefully with what we're suggesting today, you've got all the materials available there for you, so it should be quite clear, but do run through those to check and to make sure that you yourself understand how the talk is structured. And then finally, use of visual materials. So it's always good to have pictures, video, anything that you can to bring it to life so that you're not kind of boring people with death by PowerPoint, as it were. In terms of preparation then, some of this might be quite obvious, but it's always worth having a reminder. Firstly, make sure you've got enough time to actually deliver this training. So the way we've designed it, they run in 2 50-minute sessions. And you could do that on separate days, or you could do it all in one day with a break in the middle. Either way, just make sure that you do set aside enough time, and that includes maybe 10 minutes either side to kind of get people in the room, get them settled, let them say hello to each other, that kind of thing. You'll want to have a think about the room size and layout in terms of the number of people that you've actually got coming. You might want to consider background noise, for example, if you work in a depot. And then your training plan and notes, so it's definitely worthwhile having this printed off and pre-prepared so you've got it with you. Again, so you're kind of taking note of where you are in your presentation. Visual materials we already touched on, and we provided a lot of these in the presentation that will be available after this webinar as well. Then it's worth having an equipment checklist, so things like charger cables, Wi-Fi, spare laptop, that kind of thing. Refreshments always go down really well in training sessions. In our own experience, everyone's very happy when you provide biscuits or coffee, so that can just lighten the atmosphere. And finally, test that everything works. So about 10 minutes before you start, it's worth just checking all your IT to make sure that everything is going to run smoothly on the day. So some potential challenges that you might come up against, one is time. Obviously, I've already mentioned that. These sessions do run in 50-minute sessions. Just make sure you've got a little bit of time either side of that for anything that might go wrong, any contingencies. And then you might want to think about being understood by your audience, potential low engagement and difficult questions that come up. And these are all things that you can just prepare beforehand by having a think about who your audience is, who's going to be in the room on the day, and how you can best talk to them. And also just pre-prepare some difficult questions that you think might come up. And in that way, you kind of address all those challenges.
Okay, thanks very much, Harriet. We've just got another quick vote now. Again, if you can hover over the bottom of your screens, the options should come up. But we'd like to know if you have delivered or are planning to deliver any training sessions to your crews. We'd also like you to use the chat function to let us know if you've got any top tips, if you've had any particular successes delivering training sessions to crews. We will read these out when we're going through at the end the any sort of questions and answers, but we'll also add them to the details of the webinar when we upload them to the website after the webinar today. So I'll just give you a few minutes just to answer your question there. Oh, I apologise. I've just been given a message that unfortunately the voting buttons aren't working on this question. But if you do have any examples, it would be great if you could just pop them in the chat function as we're going along. That'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so now we're about to switch from the presentation that we're running at the moment to some highlights from the training presentation that's going to be available on request. That's also supported by a resource pack that will help you run your training sessions. We're just moving across from that now, and we're going to run through, like I said, a couple of highlights from the presentation, explaining kind of what the different sections are and how you can use that to deliver your own training. So the training covers 4 main sections. 1, why recycling is important. 2, what happens in the various stages of recycling. 3, what's definitely contamination and what isn't. And 4, what you can do about contamination. So we'd recommend that you sort of split into these 4 sections when you're training your crews. But by providing the sort of rundown at the beginning of the session, it helps to really set the scene and the crews know what to expect from the session. So with a little bit more detail, section 1, like I said, is about why recycling is important. This really helps to set the scene for your crews. It sort of frames the rest of the session by talking about the EU targets, recent climate crisis information, the sustainable benefits of recycling. And there's also a number of kind of icebreaker activities that will help to engage people and just sort of bed them into the session. And Julia is going to run through those activities with you now.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia Bragg. Like Debbie, I'm a Recycling and Collections Advisor at RAP. I've done some of the crew training myself with some of the slides and some of the activities that are included in the pack that we're working through today, so that we know that they work. So our first activity is early on in the session. We found that crews felt a little bit awkward sitting in a training room, and so we introduced another activity just to help them settle down and engage with us. And it's a surprise to some people that actually the UK is required by law to recycle, and we explained that the law originates in the EU. So even after the UK leaves the European Union, we have pledged to meet some pretty ambitious targets to manage our waste. So it's just providing a little bit of legal context for people. And so what we do is we give to the crews 10 European flags. And in the resource pack that we've spoken about, there are some printable flags for you to download and print. And we ask people how well do they think that the UK recycles in comparison with other countries in Europe, and also think about which countries have a bit more work to do. So the groups rank the countries in terms of best performing recycling nations through to worse. And it's just a bit of fun really, and we give them the answer. So there we are, there's the countries we've picked, and you can see the UK is in the middle. And we talk about the fact that the UK has come a long way in terms of recycling performance, but that our recycling performance has stagnated over the last few years. And so we need to do better, but that it's possible to do better. We look to the more Northern European countries. So yeah, just a bit of fun, because we found that crews needed to settle down before we got to some of the more difficult to understand concepts. Our second activity you'll need to prepare for. So you actually have to go and go rootling around in your own recycling bins at home and at work and find some materials. And the reason for this exercise is to explain to people that our recycling materials do have a real value, and we measure that value in tons. And quite a few people don't really know what a ton looks like. So it's about the same weight as a bull. So it just gives people an idea of the scale of the resources that are available for sale. So we ask you to prepare some sticky labels, like the kinds you'd use on envelopes, and write down the values of the resources in tons. And you can take that information from our materials price report that we produce regularly at RAP. And then you'd give one group a plastic bottle, another group an aluminium drinks can, one group a steel can, and then the final group a newspaper, and you give them a few minutes to choose from their 4 sticky labels with the values written on what they think the value per tonne of that material is. And then at the end, feedback to them. It's not a test, it's just for fun, and just to set in their minds the fact that they're collecting resources that are valuable, not waste. And you can also talk about the costs of disposing of these materials via landfill or energy. And just on the next slide, those are the materials values from a month ago, and their mid-range values. We've got another activity coming up now where we consider the waste hierarchy. And we found that crews do struggle a little bit with some of the concepts here. So I'd really recommend that you take a little bit of time to explain each term to them. So for reuse, maybe talk about a sofa being sold on eBay and being reused. The treat recover option, talk about a waste to energy incinerator where it's burned but potentially you can make electricity. The prevent, avoid, reduce concept, thinking about things that you don't need to make in the first place. So the coffee cup example. So you're not making the disposable cups, you're taking a coffee cup into the cafe to be refilled. Dispose to landfill. Hopefully people will be aware of this. It's just obviously burying the waste in the ground. And then recycle, maybe use an illustration of a fizzy drinks can being turned back into a fizzy drinks can. And then in the resource pack, we have some pre-prepared sheets for you to print out with the best environmental option and the worst environmental option. And with some handy blue tack, we use quite a lot of blue tack in these sessions, you'd stick those sheets up on the wall or the back of the door, 2 sheets per group. So one best, one worst. And then you need to get your scissors out and print off the green ovals from the resource pack. And for every group, you give them the 5 green ovals. And with their blue tack, they just stick up the stages from the waste hierarchy on the wall and order them around from best to worst. And at the end of the session, you run through that waste hierarchy with them and take some time here to just explain to people what these terms mean again, and maybe illustrate your responses with some more examples of where people are reusing waste or recycling waste, just to make it very tangible for your audience.
Thanks, Julia. Okay, so the second section of the presentation for your crews is about what happens in the various stages of recycling. This section includes a video that takes your crews through what happens at the MRF and looks at the different transformation of different materials. So that's kind of the key elements of this section. There are no activities in this one, but the video will kind of help to bring those things to life for them. Then in the third section, we look at what is definitely contamination and what isn't. Obviously, you're going to need to tailor these activities to your own situation so that they represent specifically your own collection services. Again, there's some really interactive activities to work through with the crews. And also the example of the materials shown on the screen are taken from some new resources that are available on our resources library now, that can help to support both your communication to residents around recycling, but also in the activities that you run with the crews. And again, Julie will just take you through those activities now.
Thanks, Debbie. So the next activity we've got is a quiz. Everyone loves a quiz, but I don't think we'll be taking our crews down the pub, but it's just a bit of light-hearted fun for 5 minutes approximately. There are some quiz sheets in our resource pack. You need to print one out per person and give everyone a pen. It's incredibly visual. There's very little written information on there. And it's just a simple tick or cross exercise to say whether the item is recyclable or not. So what you need to do is look at those images and work out whether for your own collection system in your local authority area, whether it's recyclable or not. And then run through the answers with everybody, and where you've got some people perhaps not getting the answers right, just have a little chat about why there's some confusion, because we know there's often lots of confusion, particularly around plastics. And then our final activity, you will need to prepare a little while in advance for. This is to really engage with the crews now and to make it incredibly clear what shouldn't be in the recycling bin, which is absolutely fundamental to their activities when they go out and start tagging and reporting contaminated bins. So we suggest that you get a large bag and you start collecting some safe contamination items, maybe a broken kettle, broken hairdryer, a clean nappy, and we've got a big long list in our resources pack. If you really want to have some fun, something that I've done was to take a dog waste bag and put some clean plasticine inside. That was interesting. And then you need another couple of bags, one marked up as for recycling and the other as not recyclable. And individually take some time to go around your group in the room and ask each person to pull out an item and hold it up and to say whether they think it's recyclable or not. And then you can feed back to them whether they've got the answer right or wrong. And I'd really recommend that you put enough items in the bag to go around your group twice, for that, with anything that you think will engage people, as well as obvious examples of recycling.
Okay, thank you. And then the final section of the presentation and the resources pack is about what you can do to tackle contamination. And this really is a case of over to you. It's about what your approach to tackling contamination is and what your policies are, and taking your crews through that process so that they can fully engage. If you don't have a policy, or that you think yours could probably be a little bit more robust, there are some examples of best practice in the resource pack. But again, it's just really about making sure that your crews know exactly what is expected of them when they find contamination in a bin, and how they need to act, and report that back to yourselves. And then I'll just hand over back to Harriet to give you a little bit more information about the resources pack.
Thanks, Debbie. So just to summarise then, training can really help reduce contamination and increase effective recycling among residents. And if you do have the time and the resources, we'd really recommend thinking about delivering a training session like this. As we've mentioned, all the details for training for crews are available in this wrap resource pack that we've created and in the training slides that we've created as well. These are both available on request after this webinar. So if you're interested in running a session, do please drop us an email and we can send those straight over to you. And hopefully this presentation will become a bit clearer on seeing those materials as well and seeing how you can work with them yourselves. We've also got some materials for engaging with residents on contamination. These are all new materials that came out last week and they're available on the resource library. So if you go on there, there are tags, stickers and a leaflet, all aimed at reducing contamination with residents. So you can download those and use those for free. If you're a bit confused or you're not sure about anything to do with the resource library, we ran a webinar a couple of weeks ago on that as well. So do check it out. That gives you a walkthrough how to use that site, because we know that it can be a little bit confusing. So we're now going to jump into Q&A. And we've had quite a few comments and questions coming in as we've gone along, so thank you for those. One of the ones that's come up from a few of you there is about time and resource, and basically asking how can we deliver a training session if we've only got 20 minutes or if we've only got 5 minutes.
Okay, so I would say to you, how important is it to tackle contamination in your area? how much does it cost you? And there's a really handy toolkit that Resource London, RAP is a partner organisation in Resource London with the London Waste and Recycling Board. And Resource London develops a toolkit which you can get from their website, and it'll help you understand the cost to your local authority in terms of contamination, not just immediate costs like producing a leaflet or a tag, but also the cost of rejected loads or additional gate fees. So if you understand the context of your costs, it might be that you can free up more resources, more time to work with your crews. It might even be worth paying overtime to train them if you really are struggling. So I hope that's helpful. We're just going through some of the questions.
So another one that we've just had in, what do you do when you have a crew that is not interested in the training but tells you to look for contamination in residents' bins? What would you do in that situation?
It depends on how influential that crew member is, and also the dynamics with other team members. If this is just one individual who's not interested, perhaps you dedicate a little bit of additional time for them to pop out on the rounds. It's just finding out what their issue is, why they're not interested in the training. Maybe they need more help actually out and about on the rounds.
And I think that sort of comes into the feedback mechanisms that we talked about in our previous webinar. So not only feeding back to your residents about them not doing things correctly, perhaps you need to introduce some kind of feedback mechanism to your crews. So if you've got a resource to be able to go out and check in front of your crews whether bins are contaminated or not, and then compare that with the number of bins that they're reporting, you can obviously discuss any discrepancies with them. But it's also useful for crews to know kind of how you're acting on the reporting that they're doing, and if they can feel some kind of worthwhile action is being taken from the additional time that perhaps they think it's taking them to report these incidents, then I think they're likely to be more engaged in the process.
Thanks, Zoe. I'll just carry on a little bit with those ideas on feeding back to crews. So we know that crews are often reluctant to take on any additional tasks or activities. But from local authorities that have had a robust approach to contamination and have acted quite forcefully by tagging and reporting bins, we know that this heightened activities probably only last for a month or so. The feedback is interesting, the feedback to your crews. It's ensuring that your crews continue to check in the top of the bin and to issue the tags after the initial flurry of activity. Otherwise, your contamination levels start creeping up again. We've had a question from Helen on holding the attention of crews for 50 minutes. We often find that 15 to 20 minutes are the limit when delivering most training other than health and safety inductions. Yes, that's a really good point, Helen, and I know exactly what you're talking about. That's why we've got 4 activities in our training sessions, which are really, interactive. And the crews in the main, I'll be totally honest, some of them were less engaged than others, but in the main people really did join in. It's also, we're going to provide you with the PowerPoint slides and it's up to you guys. So if you really feel you've only got 20 minutes, then just deliver 20 minutes worth of the training. Just do one activity and only a few slides. But just be aware that we all learn in different ways, but we all need to consolidate our learning. So if you were to do the training over a long period, I'd feel you'd lose some of its effectiveness. So you might want to run the training on consecutive days.
We've got one question here about how often we think you should follow up with the training. At what point would you do refresher training? Julia, you delivered some of these sessions recently. How often would you recommend that those sessions are run?
I would look to some of your own records on this. So I would say to you, how many tags are you delivering, or your crew's delivering on a round? And some of the work we've done with local authorities, we've found that actually contaminated bins are only reported a fraction of a percentage, so not even 1% of the time. So I would look to that and keep checking how often bins and boxes are reported as contaminated to see what kind of refresher training you need to do.
Dawn here has gone back to the question about kind of stretched resources and things, and about paying staff overtime and whether there's a kind of other methods. I think probably just to reiterate kind of what Julia said about the cost of contamination toolkit, that helps you to really apply kind of a whole system cost and look at exactly what contamination is costing you, so that you can create an argument for dealing with it in different ways. So hopefully that would give you the opportunity to demonstrate that perhaps paying overtime to deliver the training is of value. Yes, there is a benefit in providing this information in handouts and kind of notice boards, but we kind of know that from a behavioural point of view, you know, really speaking to people about these things and engaging them in different activities is more likely to have a positive outcome.
Yeah, I follow up with that for Dawn there, and just say that it was some of the total costs for some of the London boroughs that we work with in terms of contamination was frighteningly high, a massive proportion of their waste budget. It all very much depends on your own cost profile, how much you're paying for MRF, how much you're paying in increased MRF fees, what you have to pay in terms of rejected loads, and how robust your MRF is at rejecting things. We've had a question from Adele on doing a separate paper and card trial. Really difficult to engage the crews on why it's important. I would think there's quite a few slides within the whole slide deck that could be useful for you, Adele. It's just about setting the context for resources, for waste being a resource, and for to put it in the context of the climate catastrophe. Sorry about the pauses, everyone. There's an awful lot of questions coming in. It's quite overwhelming. Thank you so much for being so interactive with us. It's fantastic. But yeah, we're just kind of scanning through them all.
It might be worth saying we'll capture some of these questions, because we do have an awful lot coming in, and we can create a kind of a Q&A document to share with you afterwards as well, because I think that would be really useful.
There's also some really great feedback between you all as well. So someone's talked about literacy problems, which we're aware is a real issue. We try to avoid giving out handouts or putting information on notice boards when delivering training, and yeah, we totally agree with that. I think it all helps putting things on notice boards, but anything that you can make visual is fantastic, and that's why the training in the groups, or if you really need to, training people on the job is invaluable.
Anna's asked here, what's the kind of the next step after the contamination sticker? That really depends on your policies and processes. Like we mentioned, there are some good examples in the resource pack of other councils' processes. If you watch our first webinar, we recommend a process whereby you work through kind of a warning process with tags, and then ultimately consider leaving bins unemptied, so that feedback mechanism really hits home with residents. But like I say, that's kind of up to you in terms of your policies, but we can provide examples in the resource pack.
I've had a question from Shelley, which is related to the high numbers of agency staff, and wondering if you can have in-cab communications that you could leave in the vehicle, I suppose, so that it would always be there. A sort of follow-up question would be, is it mainly agency staff that are loaders, and your drivers are permanent? I suppose what you could do, assuming that your drivers are permanent and they're on the rounds most days, is to work more closely and more intensely with the drivers to encourage them to relay these messages about tackling contamination to the agency staff, and just see how that goes, I suppose. But yeah, there's definitely, if you wanted to create in-cab communications, just some pictures from some of the resources that we've got in the resource library, you could certainly use that. And even the leaflet to residents would be a good thing to leave in the vehicle to show what you don't want in your recycling bin.
We've talked a lot about feedback today, and there's a good suggestion here from Steve that you may want to do a dry run with some of a particularly good crew to seek their feedback on your your training before you finalise it and deliver it to other people. So that's a really good suggestion. Thank you, Steve.
Aha, and someone's done pictures in the cab and found them really beneficial. So fantastic. So I think what I'd urge you all to do today, if you've got 5 minutes, because I think we're going to finish ahead of time today, is have a look at the resource library and see the images that we've developed in there, because they are hopefully very recognisable for everybody. And what we've done with the user leaflet is we've almost turned it round on its head, and it's actually a guide to how to use your residual container, whether it be a sack or a bin, rather than being more focused on recycling. So it's encouraging people to put non-recyclables in the residual waste.
So we'll just give it 1 more minute. If you have any more questions, do ask them now. And we're just going to have a scan back through to see if we've missed any, because we did have quite a few coming through at the start there.
Someone's raised a point that PowerPoint's not always practical at some depots and can be a bit too much for crews. I found dumping a pile of mixed contaminated recycling on the table and getting them to sort it and use the actual recycling items as a visual cue is really great for operatives. I totally agree, and that's why we have that exercise towards the end, which is using physical examples of contamination and recycling. But what our presentation aims to do is to put some reason behind this, so why it's important to recycle, that recycling has a value, recycling has a multitude of environmental benefits. I think you know your presentation styles, you know your crews, but I would say as the slides are there and ready to be used, might be good to try it out. We've just got some more messages.
Just a quick question about whether all of this will be available after the webinar. Yes, it will. You'll get an email tomorrow or Wednesday telling you where you can get all the materials.
I think these are more handy hints between you all actually coming up now towards the end, rather than questions specifically. So I think we might just leave it there now, but thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to everyone that submitted a question. I'm sorry our second vote didn't work, but thank you all very much. Harriet, I'm just going to hand over to you because you'll be following up and sending around an email after this, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Julia. So yeah, just to wrap up, we will share an email tomorrow and let you know where you can access all the resources that we've talked about. All of the webinars that we've been running this last year are available at our website there, which is wrap.org.uk/local authorities. And if you have got any questions at all, you can use our generic inbox, which is la.support@wrap.org.uk. Or if it's more directed at one of us, you can email Julia, Debbie, or myself using the protocol firstname.lastname@wrap.org.uk. If you've got any feedback about these webinars at all, we're always interested in hearing feedback about how we can deliver them better, about how we can cover topics that are of interest to you. We'll be running a whole new series in 2020, so if you do have topics that you'd like us to cover, just drop us a note because we're always keen to hear that. So next week is our final webinar of the year. That's next Tuesday, and we're going to be looking at how to actually edit our communications materials. So do join us for that if you can. Thanks very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.